Tonight's reading is from Luke chapter 7, starting to read at verse 11. If you want to follow along in the church Bibles, you can find that on page 1035. So it's Luke chapter 7, starting to read at verse 11. Soon afterwards, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went along with him. As he approached the town gate, a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the town was with her. When the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her, and he said, "Don't cry." Then he went up and touched the briar they were carrying him on, and the bearers stood still. He said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." The dead man sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. They were all filled with awe and praised God. "A great prophet has appeared among us," they said. "God has come to help his people." This news about Jesus spread throughout Judea and the surrounding country.
Well, good evening. Oh, have I not turned myself on? Oh, I have. Or I haven't. It is muted. There we go. Highly competent as ever. Let me add my welcome to that of Lloyd. My name's Nick. I'm the vicar here. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to Bishop Hannington this evening. And we're thinking particularly tonight about why it is that Jesus is such wonderful news and why though he lived and died and rose again 2,000 years ago, why he remains utterly relevant, the most relevant person that's ever lived, relevant to our lives, relevant to us today. And I thought to myself, what better way could we reflect on that than by looking at a Renaissance painting right up to date. This is a painting that hangs in the National Gallery by Hans Holbein the Younger, who was a court painter to Henry VIII, and it was painted in 1533. It's called The Ambassadors, and I'm not sure that was its official title, but that's how it's known by everyone. It's really quite large canvas. It's beautiful. It's not actually on canvas; it's on oak, but it's beautiful. It's striking, and it is designed to tell us something. It's actually designed to tell us something about the times in which it was painted. So as I'm sure you know, 1533 is the year before 1534, and Henry VIII's Act of Supremacy, when England broke away from Rome and in a sense broke away from Europe. The original Brexit was in the air, and there are various sort of things in the painting that suggest that. As the sort of background. So these two gentlemen are French. One of them is a Roman Catholic bishop. We'll come to them in a moment. But you may not notice these details in the painting, but they are there. So the lute at the bottom of the table has a broken string. The book of mathematics is open to the page on division. There's a Lutheran hymnal at the time when the ideas of Martin Luther were increasingly affecting England, and people were beginning to question their relationship with the Church of Rome and with the Pope, and various other things that suggest just the unsettled, uncertain, fractious time that they lived in. But that's not the main message of the painting. So who are the two characters? Well, on the left of the painting, as you look at it, is a man called Jean de Danteville. He is the seigneur of Policy in France. That's a place, not a cabinet title. And he was the French king's ambassador to Henry VIII in London at this time. And he cuts quite a dramatic figure, doesn't he, with his fur and his sort of slashed silk robe that's beautiful. He is obviously a powerful, wealthy individual. The guy in black is called Georges de Selve. He is the bishop of Laval in France and is visiting his friend. And in a sense, the painting is supposed to be a record of Georges' visit to see his friend Jean. What a holiday photo it is. So what does the painting tell us about these two men? Well, it tells us their ages. One other little detail. So the painting is absolutely full of detail, and what you might notice is the way the globe is, north and south are sort of flipped, so you might see Great Britain and Scotland sort of upside down and sort of slightly misshapen at the bottom of the screen, and then above that is Europe and France, and one of only 4 places marked in France is the rather insignificant town of Policy, which is where Jean de Dinteville was the sort of senior person. So it's incredibly detailed and carefully painted. It's beautiful. And one of the things we learn about the men, strikingly, is their ages. So I don't know whether you can make it out on the picture, but that actually tells us in Latin that Jean de Dinteville is 28 when this painting is made, and his friend Georges is 25. They are young, handsome, wealthy, powerful individuals. And the table that they are standing next to and leaning on is a table that represents all the very latest in Renaissance learning. These are real Renaissance men in the truest sense. Scientific instruments for measuring the heavens and the earth, but also musical instruments for making beautiful music. They are both men of intellect and men of the arts, men of aesthetics, fully rounded people. They've got it all going on. They are young, they're rich, they're powerful, they're clever, they're accomplished. And this painting tells us all of that in various ways that we don't need to go into now. But they are living the dream. And yet I tell you all of that, and you see the painting, and if you see it in the National Gallery, it is very striking. But I suspect that what you noticed when you first saw it, the thing that catches the eye, is this sort of filthy grey-brown smudge that slashes across the foreground. My first reaction on seeing the painting was there's something wrong with this picture. And you look at the detail and the intricacy of how it's done, and you think, how on earth has it got that messed up? Surely an art restorer could fix it, but it's part of the original painting. Why? Why has Holbein painted something that is deliberately screaming at you there is something wrong with this picture? Well, here's another artwork. This is something that I came across in London in the year 2009. It's up above the main entrance of the Hiscox Insurance Building, just near Threadneedle Street, in the heart of the City of London. I just happened to be walking past there. It's where my brother's office used to be. It was counting up at a rate of almost 2 a second, like that. And it just kept counting up and counting up and counting up. And I stood there transfixed, staring at it, trying to figure out, what is this? I didn't even know it was a piece of art. I thought, is this just like the Hiscox Insurance Company's sort of profits? Are they just trying to tell us something? I looked at the numbers and I thought, well, it must be in like thousands or tens of thousands if that's the case. But it started at midnight on the 1st of January 2009 and kept counting up 2 a second, well, 1.79 a second if you like, but kept counting up all the way to 55,459,218 by midnight on the 31st of December, 2009. I had to go away and look it up. Thank goodness for Google. And as soon as I saw the name of it, I understood it's by a Spanish artist named Santiago Sierra, and it is called simply Death Counter. And every clicking up of a number represented the ending of a human life on Earth. It's a sort of a performance piece. The fee the artist received for installing the work was a life insurance policy to the total of £150,000. But it's quite a stark thing, isn't it? Just to stare at it and think, in 2009, 55,459,218 people's lives ended. Every click was the last beat of a heart. And actually, if you go to the National Gallery and see Holbein's painting, you'll see something rather strange. It's roped off, as you'd expect. It's an extremely valuable piece of art. But the rope cuts in, so that you can actually go and stand right next to the painting and look at it sideways. And it's designed like that, because if you do, that filthy grey-brown smudge looks like that. A perfectly rendered, three-dimensional depiction of a human skull. You see, you look at the painting and it says, what is wrong with this picture? That's the question that you ask yourself, and when you go and look at it, you think, this is no mistake. The artist hasn't done something terrible like spilling his paints over the canvas. Instead, what he's done is something incredibly clever. He has hidden in plain sight the thing that mars everything, the thing that relativizes the success, the youth, the wealth, the achievement of the men in the painting. They are young, they've got the world at their feet, but the clock's ticking. They're going to die. Now, look, I recognize that's not necessarily, doesn't sound like the most cheerful way to start an evening, and yet I think, as we come to look at Jesus, we'll see that actually it's a way to understand the beauty and the hope that the Christian faith represents. Let's turn to the Bible together. Let's look at Luke chapter 7. We're on page 1035. There's a Bible in front of every chair in the pew in front of you. Well, it's not a pew, it's a chair. But the Bibles are real nonetheless, no matter how I might misdescribe their location. There they are. If you pick one up and turn to page 1035, we've got this reading from Luke's Gospel. So the Bible contains 4 of these short accounts of Jesus' life, telling us about who he is, what he's done. And here in Luke, we join Jesus just after he's done something amazing. He's healed a centurion's servant. He has intervened at the moment of death. The man hasn't died, he's recovered. And now Jesus and his disciples are heading south from Capernaum, which is in the north, down towards Jerusalem. And they come to this town called Nain. And when they get there, if you notice with me in verse 11, just at the bottom of the page on the left-hand side, Jesus is with his disciples. So he's got a small group of people around him. And then we're told, then there's a large crowd going along with them. So in a sense, you've got a kind of train made up of 3 carriages. Jesus at the front, a young man at the front. Jesus, about 30 years old. And then a small group of people. And then a very large group of people. And coming north out of the city, we see another young man at the head of a similar procession. But this young man is dead. So as Jesus approaches the town gate, a dead person is being carried out, and it's described in exactly the same way. This dead person has just one person who's close. Jesus has all of his disciples. This young man has his mother. And then there's a large crowd with her. So it's like two trains heading to get towards each other. And you think, what's going to happen when these two trains collide? And what's going to happen is that Jesus is going to say two of the most ridiculous things you could possibly say at a funeral. But before we get to those things, just notice the scene. It's as bleak as it gets. This young man who is being carried out of the city is his mother's only son. Now, I've been with grieving mothers at the graves of their children, and there is no more heartbreaking sight imaginable. I've stood with my own mother at the grave of her son, my brother. But for this woman, it's even worse, because she's already a widow. She's doubly devastated. She's lost everything twice. In that culture, to be an unmarried woman with no son to look after you was to be vulnerable, unsure who's going to provide for you, who's going to protect you. So on top of her grief, she has great personal vulnerability. Everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. You can imagine the state that she was in. She's lost everything. And so Jesus walks up to her in verse 13 and says the first of the two things that you should never say at a funeral that he says here. He says, don't cry. Well, if you want a word of advice, don't say that to a grieving mother as she stands at her son's graveside. You won't be well received. Jesus walks up to this woman who has been doubly devastated, who's lost everything, and he says, don't cry. Now, if you're not familiar with the Bible, you might notice these little headings in bold type. They're not part of the Bible's text. They're just things that the translator and publisher have put in to help us find our way around. I often think that the heading for this shouldn't be Jesus raises a widow's son, but Jesus ruins a perfectly good funeral. He walks up to this woman, this grieving widow and mother, and he says, don't cry. And can you imagine what people around must have thought? Who is this guy? What does he think he's doing? Well, Jesus isn't embarrassed by having done what he's done. In fact, things are about to get an awful lot stranger, because he's now going to do something that I don't think would cross anyone's mind to do at a funeral. He walks up to the corpse and starts issuing instructions. I'm afraid I've been with enough dead people to know they're not terribly good at following instructions. But Jesus walks up to this young man who is lying there dead and says to him, young man, I say to you, get up. Well, can you imagine? I think everyone there, if they hadn't already reached the conclusion that Jesus needed some help, would probably have come to that conclusion by now. He's issuing inappropriate instructions to the grieving mother, and now he's issuing inappropriate instructions to the dead man himself. Get up. I mean, people wouldn't have known where to look, would they? Certainly no one would be meeting Jesus' eye. Until something extraordinary happened. The dead man sat up and began to talk. He sits up. Well, this is no sort of strange effect of rigor mortis or decomposition. He does sit up, but he also begins to talk. There's no bodily reason for that other than that he is alive again. all of a sudden, the things that Jesus is saying don't seem so ridiculous. It's just that Jesus doesn't fit into any of the categories that we approached him with. Because here is someone who has extraordinary authority, who has the authority to issue instructions to a dead person and expect them to be obeyed, and they are. He has a voice which has the power to reach down into the grave and drag up from it those it would keep to itself. This is no ordinary man. Notice how the people respond in verse 16. They say, God has come to help his people. There's no other possible conclusion to come to than that somehow God is behind this. No one else could do this. To raise the dead with a simple command. But Jesus isn't showing off. He's showing us who he is. Look back with me to verse 13, just the very top right-hand side of the page. Because it tells us Jesus' reaction to seeing the grief of this woman. When the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her, and he said, "Don't cry." And then in verse 15, when the young man sits up and begins to talk, notice what Jesus does. He gave him back to his mother. If you or I were to walk up to someone in her situation and say, "Don't cry," what we'd be revealing would be that we are rather insensitive and thoughtless and can't cope with someone else's pain. What Jesus is revealing is his extraordinary compassion. He is going to return to her what death has stolen. So when he says, "Don't cry," what he means is, I'm going to take away the reason for your tears. I'm going to unbreak your heart. I'm going to give back what death would steal. It's just a few words, but it's beautiful, isn't it? He gave him back to his mother. One of the things about those paintings, the Holbein painting and the Sierra, it's not a painting, is it, but the digital LCD display screen, is that they remind us of things that we'd rather not be reminded of. You see, death is such an awful reality and such an inescapable reality that we spend much of our time trying to escape it. It's an enemy that is too bad to face for most people. We don't think about it because we don't want to think about it. And those paintings, those pieces of art confront us with an unwelcome reality. But Jesus wants to confront the very worst things about our existence and our experience and bring, well, the only word I can use is salvation, rescue. He wants to break the power of the enemy that is so terrible that we'd prefer not to mention its name. He came to break death. And in this story, this short account of a day in his life, we see that he really has the power to do it. And the compassion to want to do it. Here is a Savior with a voice powerful enough to reach down into the grave and a heart big enough to care for a perishing humanity. Now, there's one other detail in that Holbein painting that I'd love to show you. If you go and stand at that point where your eye line, you get a sense of the scale of the painting from where it is relative to a normal height human being if they stand at the side and look at the skull. But you can see there's a line that points down through the skull. That's where you get the perfect 3D rendering. The equivalent line going up to the corner of the painting reveals this. It's hidden but it's a depiction of Jesus on the cross. And in this week of all weeks, as Christians remember the death and resurrection of Jesus, we learn just how deep Jesus' heart of love goes. Because not only did he have the power to raise others from the dead, he was willing to give his own life so that others might live, so that we could be reconciled to the God from whom we have alienated ourselves, the God who is the source of life, the God with whom relationship would be impossible without Jesus dying in our place. And so that's what Holbein wanted to tell in his painting. Despite all the crazy things that were going on in the world, despite the uncertainty and the disruption and the discord and the fracture of 16th century Europe, the biggest problem these men had was not diplomatic, it was their mortality. And the solution to that lay in the death of Jesus on the cross and in his resurrection, what Christians celebrate at Easter. Now, it's an extraordinary claim, isn't it? An extraordinary claim that the problem that is so big that we don't even think about it, we worry about other things that are much smaller because we're too afraid to be afraid of death itself. But that is what Jesus came ultimately to defeat. That's what Christians celebrate on Easter Sunday morning. It'd be wonderful if you could join us there. Even if you wouldn't normally come to church, why not join us for that celebration on Easter Sunday? But I'd love to just suggest a couple of things to you as I finish. These are big claims about Jesus. I don't expect you to swallow them just because I say so. But it'd be a wonderful thing to look into for yourself. One way you could do that is by reading one of those 4 short accounts of Jesus' life. We've got plenty of them around the church building. We'd love to give them to you. They're totally free. Take them away and read at your leisure. And if you'd like someone to read one of them with you, well, if you came with a friend, maybe they'd be willing and able to do that. But if not, come and talk to me or Lloyd, and we'll arrange for someone to sit and have coffee with you from time to time and just look through the pages of these. They're very short accounts, but they are packed with evidence for these claims about Jesus. And if you'd like to understand in a sort of more bite-sized way the sort of central claims of Christian faith and the central offer of the good news of Jesus, then we've got this little book we'd love to give you. Please do take one of these away. It's called The Man on the Middle Cross, and it takes 3 encounters of people with Jesus and uses them to explain. That is 3 encounters with Jesus that we find in the New Testament, and uses them to explain the message of Jesus and how to respond. Please do take one of these and read it if you haven't already considered that for yourself. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope that you will at least be intrigued at the possibility that there is one who can offer hope against the things that we don't even imagine there can be hope in the face of.